So this is about ways of seeing and the future of customer experience. So I'll start with talking about attention, meaning, and action, and how our brain is actually divided in two halves. And this is not pop science. This is actually from some of the world's greatest neuroscientists who have been looking at this. So how do we make sense of the world? In what ways do our different parts of the brain do that? I'll talk about the rise of the left brain, how left brain thinking arguably controls most of our organizational thinking up until now, and how we need to use some more right brain thinking as we move further forward. So I mentioned a report that came out from PwC, report in the Financial Times, saying that unless organizations change themselves rapidly, CEOs in I think over 40% reckon that they might not exist in 10 years. So we're in a journey of change. And I think through this conference, we've made the point that we need to understand what does value mean for customers, or what's their jobs to be done, so that our value proposition actually addresses real needs rather than imagined ones. So we need to get much better understanding what customers need, but also we're getting pressure from wider society for businesses to step up and recognize that they have a wider role in our world and in our community than just selling products, whether it's employment, whether it's the action of organizations in the localities they operate, or whether it's their supply chains and their contribution to the climate crisis and the world ecology. We have many needs from society that organizations need to understand and be able to speak to. So how can our organizations think and act with this kind of empathy and understanding? So first of all, we need to understand a little bit more about how we make sense of the world. So the brain, a fantastic organ, it has 100 million or 100 billion neurons. On average, there's about 14,000 connections between each neuron and other neurons. And if you do the maths on that, there are more pathways for the brain, through the brain, than there are particles in the universe. So the brain is the most complex thing in the universe, which is something quite magical to behold. However, how does the brain make sense, or how do we make sense of what we see? We make sense through our senses of perception, and our perception needs attention. So what we focus on also drives what we attend to and what we think about and how we make sense. So where we afford our attention is super important, and what things do we consider and look at drives the shape of what we see the world made of and what we see as our impulses and responsibilities to act. So attention is connected to action in very profound ways. Now, the brain has evolved, and this is right the way through mammals into lower organisms as well, two halves to the brain. And it's perplexed scientists for a long time. Why does the brain wasting space by having two halves that are connected together? But from people who've had either strokes or brain injuries, or just now we're looking at electromagnetic resonance, be able to see what's going on in the brain, it's possible to see now with greater clarity why the brain has two halves and why it attends to the world in two separate ways, although those ways work in concert together. So the left brain is narrow, it's sharply focused, it's attention to detail, it breaks the world into bits and looks at those bits and assembles the world in a collection of bits through which it decides what it's going to do. So we break things down and see things as parts with the left brain. But the right brain is something that looks out and sees the whole picture. It's sustained, it's broad, it's open, it's vigilant. So the right brain sees the whole picture, and the left brain sees the parts from which it deduces what's going on in the world and what it constructs as things it's going to do against that world. So the left and right brain are working together in parallel to give us a kind of two-focused view of it. So the left hemisphere is more interested in representation. It's more like the bureaucratic part where everything's broken down into specialist bits. It likes language, metaphor. It sees the world as composed of multiple things and bits. It doesn't really see the whole. It's conceptual, it's simplified. It sees things as a sequence of events, and it obsesses over its own creation. So the left brain can only see the bits that it's working on. It can't see the whole, and it can't see anything else. And it's very certain about what it sees. It's a little bit of a tyrant, and it focuses on its own creations. However, the right hemisphere does see the bigger picture. It sees the connectedness of everything. It sees the overall narrative. It sees bigger, wider, broader concepts. It's the part of the brain that's involved in awe, love, art, morality, poetry. In fact, all the things that make life worthwhile and see our place in the bigger scheme of things. So the right brain is arguably that which makes us most human and most connected, and the left brain is the sort of bureaucratic part that figures out and breaks the world into bits in order to manipulate it. So Dr. Ian McGilchrist, if you haven't come across him, really worth checking out his YouTube channel, but also his books. They are absolutely amazing, where he's a neuroscientist, a philosopher, and a professor of art histories. He's one of these few remaining polymaths who can stride the world of neuroscience and science on one hand, but also the world of art and culture and philosophy in the other. And so he's been looking at the history of the world and how our different ways of thinking have shaped the world we live in. We lived in a much more holistic time, thousands of years ago, living in arguably in tribes and communities in deep relationship with the earth and the world and the ecology. We lived in balance and harmony, and that's much more of a right brain way of working. We got the Greek philosophers who's kind of instituted more curiosity how the world works, and they developed philosophies, arguably becoming a little bit more left brain. Then we entered the age of enlightenment and the age of reason, where we wanted to dispense with the idea of grand narratives and God and all these things that gave us a broad, deep picture of how the world worked and what our place was in it. And we could break the world down into science and act upon the world to shape it in our own needs. And of course, this gave rise to the industrialization, the fact that we can build the world through technology and dominate it through our will. Leading forward now to the digital equivalent of that, which is we break everything down into data and try and assemble bits of the world through our data-driven ways of thinking. But arguably, as we've gone from the left to the right, we're increasingly losing sight of the whole and becoming more obsessed by the parts and the bits and the things that we can measure. And data is probably a great example of the atomization of the world into the smallest possible bits and trying to assemble a world made of constructing it out of bits rather than seeing the whole. So most businesses still run a little bit on this industrial age thinking, which is we need to maximize our profit. We need to build all these silos and sub-silos and sub-sub-silos, which is why we have all these departments. And we need to get as maximum revenue as we can out of the market in order to keep our investors as happy as possible. So this often leads to siloed organizations, siloed experiences, and obviously customers, as we've been talking about in this conference, can often experience the different parts of the organization speaking in its own language, in its own terms, measuring different things in different ways, which gives a somewhat fractured, disconnected, uncoordinated experience at the customer level. And of course, one of the dark sides of extraction is that we're focusing on hitting our numbers. So we do everything we can to hit our numbers. And the fact that we may be contributing to global warming or inequalities or any of the other externalities, we kind of push to one side. However, the world is now accumulating so much damage from the total sum of all organizations pumping out CO2 and extracting from the planet in unsustainable ways. The sum total of a total economy that's working in such a way that affords more and more of wealth to a fewer people and a greater number of people living in poverty. We've got externalities at the social level, at the political level, at the economic and the global level, which are now piling up to an extent where it risks bringing down the whole system. And we're now being business being asked to internalize those externalities in a new way. So we've got a challenge where the left brain thinking wants to control specialization, bureaucracy, but it also sees people as objects that fit in the system to deliver tasks. Often customers are objects which we need to convert and get and persuade and get the money out of them. And one way that the left brain likes to see human beings is not as full human entities with their own stories, their own humanity, who they are, their families, their hopes, their aspirations and dreams, and how do we help people do that? They see them as consumers, people that we persuade to buy our stuff, which is a kind of left-brain reductionist view of our fellow humans. So people become objects to hit targets, and lo and behold, we've now got a world that's so enamored with that way of thinking, and people have internalized it from the market and consumer side. So people see their lives as gaining more stuff, climbing up the greasy pole if they can, which leaves people quite unfulfilled because we don't see each other as in the full rounded human beings we are. We see each other as objects to be manipulated either for my political bottom line, my financial bottom line, or my commercial social media bottom line if it's trying to get as many likes as possible. And lo and behold, we have rising levels of meaninglessness and poor mental health, which is spreading across the world as a kind of vacuum of where is the human story in our modern world. So if we only what we can measure matters, then we tend to get this tyranny of, well, if it's transactional data, then it's important. If it can go in an Excel spreadsheet and a dashboard, then that's the only data that matters. The other human side, we tend to miss out. And this drive to management by Excel spreadsheet leaves not just the private sector, but the public sector chasing targets and undertaking behaviors that are often quite toxic for the people that work there and don't really fully account for the humans and their values and their goals and their jobs to be done, in our language, out there in the world. This is a great quote from Robert Kennedy, which kind of hits home why looking at data and money, or looking through that lens, misses out on many of the important things that really make life worthwhile. So he said, gross national product does not allow for the health of our children, the quality of their education, or the joy of their play. It does not include the beauty of our poetry or the strength of our marriages, the intelligence of our public debate, or the integrity of our public officials. GDP, he's talking about here, measures neither our wit nor our courage, neither our wisdom nor our learning, neither our compassion or our devotion to our country. It measures everything, in short, except that which makes life worthwhile. And there can't be a more powerful and poetic way of saying there is much more to human life, both individually and socially, than just looking at it through the lens of financial metrics. So trust in institutions is falling. There are some sections that are where maybe it's stabilized a little bit more, but certainly in politics, in third sector, and in business, all the trust measures seem to indicate falling levels of trust. This is causing, politically, of course, rising levels of populism, because charlatans and charismatic characters can come in with a narrative that purports to save the day, and if people don't really know what's going on and they don't trust the existing establishment, they will gravitate towards these more charismatic populist politicians, which ends up destabilizing politics and society. But also we see appallingly low levels of employee engagement. Lots of people are not engaged at work. A majority of people at work, according to the surveys, are either not engaged or actively disengaged, which means they hate their work and can often be causing trouble in the workplace. So this notion of trust and relationship is falling both inside organizations and in society in general. So the left brain way of thinking is causing some blowback, let's put it that way. And we see that in increasing dissatisfaction in all forms of life, increasing anxiety about what the hell's going on. Why has no one got a grip? And many of us can feel a little bit like we're stuck on the conveyor belt or in the machine, just feeding the machine, doing our bit and going home, not really feeling like we're part of anything bigger. So we need to rebuild trusted relationships with our customers, trusted relationships with our employees, and our organizations need to build trusted relationship with society. And the key to that is humanizing relationships, seeing people more holistically and acknowledging them more holistically as human beings, and bringing that alive in the way that we communicate and encounter and relate to each other, both at work and as customers in society. Creating value is one way of thinking about that. Amazon are good. We've heard that there are some criticisms of Amazon. Arguably, they're functionally really good at executing and delivering what customers need and want, but they're maybe not as such a good employer, treating their people as objects in service of this. So they may be a little bit one-sided, but thinking about value is what's sustained and driven, and obviously being extremely customer-centered is what's driven Amazon to the heights they've got. Whether they can sustain it, whether there's a blowback from their business model and their way of behaving, we'll wait and see. But the idea of focusing on value ruthlessly and determinately is certainly a key and really important way of thinking. So how might we use right brain thinking, this is holistic, seeing the whole big picture, to reclaim our CX, because that is a holistic enterprise, and arguably our humanity as well? So question is, what is value? We've explored a little bit of that in this conference, but if we don't know what value is, if we're just shipping product and measuring figures, then we're not really connecting with what is most valuable. And we need to really identify what do we mean by value? What value does our organization able to create, and for whom? That's really key to sort of zooming in to see what it is we could be doing more of and better to really speak to that value creation. And value is, when you dig deeper a little bit more philosophically, is one's judgment of what's really important, not to climb up the greasy pole or hit the figures, but something more deeper and fundamental, more right brain. What are we doing in such a way that builds a better world for individuals, better world for the collective, better world for the entire of human civilization, and arguably the planet? Can we be nourishing a greater flourishing? Is value, if it speaks into that, is oriented and anchored in something that delivers good for people, good for the world, and arguably, if we do that well, good for the organization as well. Meanwhile, we do see consumers are changing. we do see technology rapidly changing. We're going to see a faster change in technology in the next 10 years than we've seen any time in history. One of the things about AI is not just a piece of technology in its own, it's being used to generate developments in all forms of science and development. So whether it's protein folding to get closer into understanding how cells work and how disease works, to thinking about next generation chips and quantum computing or robotics, AI is powering all of that acceleration. And as AI improves itself, so it accelerates further innovation. So we're rapidly generating more and more powerful technology. And one of the questions one of my favorite philosophers says is, we're rapidly acquiring the power of gods, but will we have the wisdom and love of gods to know how to use it? So in order to unlock value, you've got to look beyond the product and see the person. Who is it that we're trying to serve? What really matters to them? What are their goals and aims and hopes and dreams? What is it that we can do to add more value into their lives through the products and services we offer? It's a way of thinking about our products and services that's not just about the thing, but what is the job the customer's trying to get done? What is the opportunity they're trying to realize? And if we can lock in and understand that, we can get to work building the products and services that really make a difference. So one way of thinking about this at the organizational level is maybe the next level of capitalism is what we might call valuism. That's a system focused on creating value and prosperity for all stakeholders. So what is it that customers truly value? How do we orient our organization towards that? And then what is it that generates meaningful and work for employees? Certainly, if they've got a story about we're coming to work for an organization that's actually not just shipping product, but doing something meaningful in the world, then employees become more motivated. There's a reason that transcends their task, that they're there working together to do something. So if we can understand and work towards delivering true value for customers, and we bring meaningful work to our employees, we can connect more motivated and purpose-driven employees with a purpose in the world that delivers goodness and flourishing. And you connect those two together, you unleash powerful forces that work in support of the organization. That's employees who are way more committed to what they're doing, and customers who are more committed to the organization that's delivering true value. If we can also bring in, what does our existence in the world bring to the betterment of society and the planet, then we've got another story about what we're doing to contribute to a bigger story that's contributing to prosperity. And if we do that right, we create a value scheme or a value model that will generate income that will keep owners and investors satisfied. And it will be long-term sustainable, not based on short-term tactics and promotions and manipulation. It's based on truly authentically being a place that customers want to come to, people want to work, that delivers value, that then creates, as a lagging indicator, better returns. So the core really is, rather than just looking at bits and parts and data and building things from a left brain perspective, let's use our right brains to see the greater whole, and then use our left brains in service of making that whole a reality. And that's building better business for a better world. I hope you found that interesting and insightful. It's certainly something I'm very passionate about, and I'm actually doing some work now with the Enlightened Enterprise to really formulate an explication of all of that in a way that enables us to bring together leading thinkers from across the world to provide sets of insight, frameworks, tools to enable all businesses to take advantage of this way of thinking, which I think is so cool for in the 21st century. So